Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas. He is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time this morning.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
So you hear Secretary Blinken's warning there that Russia could double its already significant forces on the border in short order. CNN's reporting that Russia has added further forces just in recent days. In your view, has the current mix of threatened sanctions and additional military assistance, has that deterrence failed?
Yeah, I don't think we're providing the deterrence necessary to stop Putin from invading Ukraine, the breadbasket of Russia. He wants to reclaim the old Soviet empire, and I don't see a lot of deterrence, on the table. In fact, Jim, what I'm seeing is a prelude to war when you're seeing live exercises on the Ukrainian border, a false flag operation that they were going to use as a pretense for warfare to invade Ukraine, the cyber attacks, which said, be afraid and expect the worst. Russia is pulling out its embassy members out of Kiev. And finally, these joint exercises with Belarus right on the border of Ukraine is quite disturbing, in addition to the 100,000 Russian troops, the tanks, and the triad operation air, land, and sea.
So let me ask you this. The current mix of weapons, lethal military assistance that U.S., NATO, and NATO have been sending there, they include things like Javelin anti-tank missiles, also man-pad shoulder-fired missiles to come from NATO allies. The intention, as you know better than me, is to raise the military and personnel costs for Russia if it were to choose to invade, to make it, frankly, bloodier. What specifically have you not seen in terms of assistance that you want to see?
I sign off on all foreign military weapon sales, including Ukraine. I would like to see, I introduced a bill to provide more lethal assistance, again, with respect to the triad. Remember, he wants to control the Black Sea. He got Crimea. He wants Odessa. He cut off our LNG exports from the United States, and he wants to control that. I would like to see that. But honestly, in my discussions, both classified and non, I don't think we can provide enough lethal weapons to stop an invasion. I think what I recommended, and I've talked to a lot of experts, on this, is a buildup and a presence in our NATO allied nations on the eastern flank. That being Poland, that being, Romania, that being the Baltic states. That would send a signal to Putin that there would be a consequence to this action. Barring that, I think he views, particularly after Afghanistan, when he sees a weakness, and we're projecting weakness, you're seeing with President Xi, the Ayatollah, Kim Jong-un, and Putin sees this as the time, I think.
Let me ask you, should the U.S. keep a potential NATO military response on the table? In other words, put differently, was it a mistake to take a military response by the U.S., by NATO, by the West, off the table?
I think it's a huge mistake. That's the only deterrence we could have. I mean, we can arm Ukraine with lethal weapons, but it takes time to, train and prepare for that. We're talking about a very aggressive short timetable. In the classified space, I can't go into detail, but this plan is very specific and very aggressive in its timetable. And so we need to send a very bold message of deterrence. And that, in my judgment, would be, we did move 10,000 troops out of Germany into Poland. Let's have the troop exercises in the Baltic states and show to Putin that, the rhetoric is one thing, but you have to have the action to back it up.
Let me ask you this about economic sanctions, because to date, the administration's response has been, here's what we're going to do if you invade, as opposed to preemptively. You've talked a lot about Nordstream. Should the U.S. sanction Nordstream today to deter an invasion rather than wait potentially for what Russia does on the ground?
Well, I disagreed. The president waiving in the national interest of the United States to allow Putin to build his pipeline into Europe, cutting off U.S. exports into Odessa and the Black Sea, only emboldened Putin and made Europe dependent on Russian dirty energy, which, by the way, our LNG is more clean from a climate change standpoint. So, these are all projections of weakness that I disagreed with at the time, and I think it's emboldened Putin, and he's got to make the calculation, is this the right time to do it?
You're very aware that a big part of Putin's strategy is straight-up propaganda. So it's been notable to see some in this country repeat, frankly, some of Russia's arguments about Ukraine. And I want to play something that Tucker Carlson said last night regarding Putin's and Russia's view of Ukraine. Have a listen.
Imagine if Mexico fell under the direct military control of China. We would see that as a threat, of course. There'd be no reason for that. Well, that's how Russia views NATO control of Ukraine, and why wouldn't they?
Does this help Russia to have prominent Americans repeat, in effect, their rationale for military action in Ukraine?
Yeah, I talked to Wendy Sherman last night, Deputy Secretary. We want to have a unified front as Americans against Putin and the Russians. This could be the largest invasion in Europe since World War II, if it happens. And so I think being united, but, we have a difference of opinion. And I told her to use me, as maybe a foil. I don't like the rhetoric that somehow Putin's a good guy. I don't like the rhetoric that, this Soviet, it goes back to, he wants to reclaim the glory of the old Soviet Empire. And you're talking about democracies versus authoritarianism. This is absolutely critical to NATO, and it's a direct threat to NATO. And if we don't take a stand to stop this, I'm afraid, as you asked me in the beginning, it's more likely that they will invade. And as Jen Psaki said, she said, Russia could at any point launch an attack. And I agree with her. And that's why this is so important. It's a very high-stakes game. I don't like playing into Putin's hands.